Okay. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on wherever you are. We welcome you today. We're here to talk about education. The theme for our webinar is Teachers as a Global Community of Practice for Each Other. My name is Doreen Myrie. I'm a special education professor at Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina. Special thanks to Bennett College for providing us this platform. I would also like to thank our planners and presenters. We have a fantastic panel for you today. Each speaker is given 15 minutes. The audience is welcome to post questions and comments in the chat section, and we'll do our best to address your questions. A reminder to the audience, please mute yourselves. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Steve Shara. He's an educational researcher in Malawi and education policy analyst. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly welcome Dr. Steve Shara.
Thank you very much, Doreen, for that very kind introduction. Welcome to the audience from here in Malawi, in the US, and wherever you are on the planet. This is the second webinar in the series, organized by a coalition of partners. So I am the Vice Chair of the Education Policy and Teacher Development Forum, IPOTED, here in Malawi. So IPOTED is the organization that is organizing this series, but we have partners, and a very big partner in the United States, Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina, where Dr. Myrie and other colleagues are. And I think there are three departments there that are involved in this: the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, the Department of Journalism and Media Studies, and also the Center for Global and Interdisciplinary Studies at Bennett College. And then here in Malawi also, we are doing this in partnership with the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology. And so I'll say a little bit about IPOTED, and then I'll get to introduce the three panelists, because we are three co-moderators, and I'll do my part and then hand over to the next moderator. But IPOTED, that's Education Policy and Teacher Education Forum, was formed in February in 2019. And at the time, the Malawi government, through the Ministry of Education, was reviewing the national strategy for teacher education and development. And so the forum was put together to bring in voices from teachers and other stakeholders to contribute into that review process. And then it has evolved since then. The membership is quite diverse. We have members from teachers themselves, in private schools, in public schools, in primary schools and secondary schools, and also universities. Then we have members from civil society organizations, some education activists, and we have education managers also even in the ministry itself, and we also have other stakeholders, and they all make up the membership of IPOTED. So our first webinar was on the 15th of June this year, just a few months ago. And it focused on COVID-19 and its effects on the education sector here in Malawi. It was a collaboration, again, like this one, and our colleagues in the US, Bennett College, and other places were there. So there are presentations from both the US as well as in Malawi. And that webinar aroused a lot of interest here in Malawi, in the US, and also elsewhere. And there were quite a few questions that came up, and we thought it would be important to have a follow-up webinar. And so here we are with our second webinar, and the theme today is Teachers as a Global Community of Practice for Each Other. And again, we have presenters from Malawi and also from the US. So without much further ado, I'm going to introduce the first presenter. He is Justin Ntawanji. Justin is a teacher at Magawa Secondary School in Mchinji here in Malawi. And he's going to talk about issues to do with motivation for teachers. So over to you, Justin.
Thank you. I'm Justin Manuel Tawanji. As Dr. Steve Sharab already said, I'm a Sunday school teacher at Pagal. I teach history and English. So I'm going to present on teacher motivation, retention, and attrition in Malawi. So my presentation, will you please go to the next slide. So my presentation outline will be the background. I'll present the background of teacher motivation, retention, and attrition in Malawi. Then the theoretical framework that is underpinning this discussion, the factors that are affecting teacher motivation and attrition in Malawi, and the recommendations. And lastly, there will be the references. Now we'll start with the background. So the issue of teacher motivation, retention, and attrition has been discussed many times, since it is one of the pressing issues facing the education sector worldwide. The 2017-2018 EMIS, that is the Education Management Information System of Malawi, defines attrition as the term that describes teachers leaving a school with reasons reasons ranging from death to transfers. And the Malawian education sector has not been spared by this problem, despite various efforts by the government to improve teachers' working conditions. The government have been trying to promote teachers, put in some incentives like the rural allowance for the teachers working in the rural areas. But the problem is still persisting. So according to the 2020 to 2030 National Education Sector Investment Plan, the government reported some of the factors or issues that are contributing to poor learning outcomes in Malawi. And these are high absenteeism by both learners and teachers, which is somehow attrition, low teacher morale and motivation, and inefficient deployment of teachers. So the government tried to deploy teachers, but the system still backfired. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the background continuation. So the 2017 to 2018 EMIS shows that almost 3,000 primary school teachers left their job without a specific reason. So which is a very huge number. And it further shows that there were 14,398 secondary school teachers in Malawi in 2018, a slight increase from 14,333 in the previous year, reflecting an increase of 0.5%, which is somehow negligible. It was only an increase of 65 teachers. Yet in that year, the government had recruited almost 700 something teachers, secondary school teachers, but some of those teachers were lost. They resigned. So the current push by secondary school teachers to form a new union called Secondary School Teachers Union of Malawi system and break away from the Teachers Union of Malawi is a manifestation of restlessness and motivation in teachers who feel that their voice is never heard. There's this argument by teachers on the ground that TUM has been compromised, that it is no longer carrying their voices to the authorities. So the teachers are very restless and they are demotivated. Next slide, please. So let us look at the theoretical framework that we're going to underpin our discussion. So Bennett and Akinpwang, defines work motivation as the psychological process that influences individual behavior with respect to the attainment of workplace goals and tasks. Now, this discussion has been underpinned by the Abraham-Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the equity theories of motivation. I think most of us are well conversant with the Abraham-Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which has stipulated that people are moved to perform various tasks in order to satisfy their needs, which ranges from physiological to psychological. So the physiological are at the base of the triangle, and the psychological are at the top. So based on the Abraham-Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it can be postulated that teachers leave the profession or transfer out of the workstation because their basic needs are not being met. So can you please go to the next slide? And the equity theory, which was proposed by Stacey Adams, and it bases on the idea that people want to be treated fairly in relation to others. Inequity exists when a person perceives his or her job input and outcomes to be less than the job inputs and outcomes of another person. Teachers compare their own efforts and rewards with those of peers who may be in other occupations, as well as within the teaching profession. Maybe they are working in the private sector. So the teachers feel that they are not being rewarded the way their fellow peers are being rewarded in other profession or in the private sector. So such comparisons are likely to influence teachers' perceptions of their own status. Sometimes it affects their motivation, sometimes it affects their esteem. They feel that they are not that valued much. So can you please go to the next slide? Now, the factors that affect the teacher motivation, retention, and tuition in Malawi. The first one is the poor remuneration. This is one of the longest standing issues surrounding teacher motivation, retention, and tuition in Malawi. It can be argued that teachers are not paid enough than other civil servants. Of course, the government will argue that the teachers receive the same salary as their counterparts in other departments in the civil service on the same grade. They say if you're on grade I, that is, you have a degree, and the other person is also working, you are a teacher in that grade I, and the other person is also, for instance, a nurse at grade I. You are all receiving the same salary. But this does not hold water because the teachers does not complement their salaries with any allowances. There is nothing that they can complement their salaries. So whenever they receive the salary, it's only the salary. So for instance, it's very saddening when an MCE holder in the health department receives the same salary as a diploma holder in the teaching service. And the argument given is that they don't want to lose the health worker through attrition. So the government introduced some incentives for the health workers so that they should be retained, they should not left their profession. But the government did not also introduce the same incentives to the teaching profession. So this somehow leads to the losing of teachers. We lose the teachers resign, some leave their job, some does not come to work. So poor remuneration. Another slide, please. In the morning and Rama's study, one informant said, a teacher said, teachers decide to leave the profession because teachers in Malawi are not regarded as human beings. They receive very poor salaries. And this is what a teacher, it was Molen and Rama were interviewing teachers. So low motivation due to low salaries often manifests itself in teachers being described as lazy or tired and unwilling to put in the work required of them. This is what Molen and Rama found. Now, the teachers resort to truancy, they don't come to work. Moonlighting, there's instances of teachers selling fritters, selling freezers during break time at school. So this is moonlighting, and even outright resignation to seek greener pastures, defeating the government's goal of improving the pupil qualified teacher ratio. Now, some teachers spend most of their time running away from debtors. There's this loan sharks called Caterpillar. So when they take that money, they're always running away from those debtors. Some have their ATM cards confiscated by the debtors. So the teachers like peace of mind. So a person who doesn't have peace of mind cannot work accordingly and is demotivated. This image of a demotivated and financially burdened teacher reflects a situation common in many teachers in the public education system developing countries. That's what Bennett found. Now,
you have 5 minutes. Please, 5 minutes.
All right. The other one is poor working conditions. The rural areas, the conditions in rural areas are not that good. The rural allowance, the government used to give teachers rural allowance, but the rural allowance has lost its value. And the teachers always, when they get transferred out from rural areas, they're always running away from rural areas. So this is called, it leads what Molen and Rama called as the death of a school. Can you please go to another slide? There's teacher is rewards and incentives. So the rewards are the teacher good rewards for extraordinary performance. For instance, there's this school ordinary primary school which achieved the 100% pass rate. So they only, instead of promoting all the teachers, they only promoted the head teacher. So it means the other teachers were not rewarded accordingly. Here, another instance, we have used an analog of Kamusbala Football Club, which after it won the 2016 Super League, all the soldiers were promoted to the next. So if the same way, the same initiative can also be applied to the education system, at least the teachers can be motivated. Another slide, please. Next slide. So the other factor is teacher management. So the government does not involve teachers in decision making. They always use the top-down approach. So the government just put out directions and the teachers have to follow. This somehow leads to teachers being demotivated, and there's no clear career path. And the teachers who are ambitious, they only profession. And also some oppressive head teachers, they connive with education officials to get teachers transferred out of institutions, creating a vacancy. And the teachers also require some funds, some soft loans, so that they should further their studies through professional development through universities and other institutions. Next slide, please. Now the other slide is society perception. Next slide, please. On society perception, the teachers are not respected by the society. The teaching profession is taken as an occupation of failures and low-lifers. The previous president, Dr. Joyce Banda, even mocked the teachers by saying they receive less salaries than dairy cows. So somehow the teachers were like, they were disgraced. And other
2
NGOs
minutes,
come up.
Justin, 2 minutes.
All right. The other NGOs come up with these programs which at least they demotivate teachers. And the next slide. Next slide, please. On recommendations. So the recommendations that our government should come up with are the incentives that they should, with the way they did with the health workers, so that the teachers we should not be losing teachers, they should not be losing teachers in the teaching profession. And the rural allowance should be revised so that the teachers should be ruled to work in the rural areas. And there should be a clear career path in the teaching service. And teachers with exceptional skills should be retained and properly utilized. And the top-down approach should be stopped by the government. At least it should consult.
1 minute.
And there's also the change of perception of teaching. The society should change their perception of the society. The next slide, please. So the next slide is the references which have been read. And thank you. That's what I had for you. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin. You've did a very wonderful presentation. You've put a lot of thought into it, and you did some research around this. So the issue of teacher motivation in Malawi is quite huge, and also long running. We have been talking about these issues for a very long time. And it's interesting that there are a few okay, so the timer is telling me here that you are done, but you beat the timer. You did really well in terms of time. Thank you. Yes, so, and the interesting thing is that some of the issues you're raising, especially in the recommendations, the motivation issues, career path, and so on and so forth, there are interventions that are supposed to address those issues. There are policies that have been drafted, but the speed with which the policies are adopted so that they can be implemented is maybe the issue here. And I think that's something probably we need to look into a bit more to say, why does it take so long for recommendations to make it into policy and then for policies to be implemented? Because the awareness is quite there. Thank you so much once again. So our next presenter is Private Mchenga. Private Mchenga is Deputy Head Teacher at Kawale Community Day Secondary School here in Lilongwe. So Private, over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar. And my presentation is on the status of school leadership in public secondary schools in Malawi. I try to generalize practices in all of Malawi, and they seem to go like together. So next slide, please. I begin by talking about this quote from Dance, who says the foundation of every state is the education of its youth. And this, I believe, would help or can be achieved through the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which talks about inclusive and equitable quality education, as well as the promotion of lifelong learning. Next slide, please. Generally, I try to be unconventional in this presentation, and by trying to provoke discussion on thoughts and observations on current practices, on basically the selection, recruitment, and induction, as well as training of school leadership in Malawi. And also at the end, try to propose possible alternative solutions, how we can work around these general problems. But within the presentation, I also briefly juxtapose how a number of countries globally manage their school leadership programs. And the literature on school leadership practices is a bit sparse, especially in the Malawian context, as well as in Africa as a whole. But what is available seems to point in the same direction by underlying how the lack of leadership training and also selection practices in most education systems in Africa. And for purposes of this presentation, school leadership shall imply the head teacher as well as the deputy head teacher, whom are at least at the helm of school leadership in at every institution. And as it was said in one of the previous webinars about how a country's education system, the quality of a country's education system cannot exceed the quality of its teachers. Next slide, please. As a methodology, I tried to circulate. I circulated a survey amongst my circle of my network, and generally this would be referred to as convenience sampling. And what came out from this survey points to basically four main issues. That in the first place, recruitment and selection does not follow any specific criteria. It is somehow ad hoc, whereby, for example, some claim that this was a condition for promotion to a higher grade. And just a very few of them were being promoted to the right position there of headship. But others were in lower positions, such as head of department or senior teacher. And for them to accept those promotions, they had to go they had to be a head teacher, whether they wanted it or not. And then some had gone for further studies, and upon returning, they were given headship. So it was either for a diploma or a first degree. And again, there were also those who attended interviews for the position of head teacher. And this is somehow rare, because most schools are headed by people who do not hold the position of head teacher on their official records. And again, there are also other respondents who claim that they were even not consulted. They were just told, or they just saw on the posting instructions that they would begin their leadership, they should take up their leadership positions. And length of service ranged from 4 years to 28 years. So it took different length of service. Some assumed these positions earlier than others, so 4 years to 28 years. Next slide, please. When it comes to induction programs and training of school leaders, out of the 13 respondents who responded to this survey, only 2 had undergone a leadership training at the Malawi Institute of Education. And this was basically in 2003, when the Malawi Institute of Education did offer some school leadership programs funded by the World Bank, as well as the Department for International Development. And also what came out from these discussions, or from these surveys, was basically that those who were called to meet their divisional officers were simply told, maybe in an hour or so, what they should expect. But otherwise, responsibility to induct them was left in the hands of fellow team members, either at the same school or in neighboring schools, at least so that they could walk them through the through the process of what headship is like. And just recently, one of the respondents as well also pointed out they are benefiting from the improvement, a project known as the Improvement of Secondary Education in Malawi, ISEM, which has rolled out a school leadership development program. And they had very good stories to tell, because it appears that within a short period of time, they were able to be empowered on school with proper skills that would help them manage their schools properly. But with the COVID-19 pandemic, it appears this program was somehow interrupted. Next slide, please. So implications of this kind of selection of leadership. Some did accept to become school leaders just because it was a precondition for promotion, and who doesn't want to be promoted? So they just had to take up the position, although they felt that they were not ready or they were not interested to take up school leadership positions. So this generally points to the fact that the system does impose appointments, and this technically results in a misfit of skills. So as a result, people just go through the processes without actually seeing what they are supposed to do. And again, there is also this lack of school leadership preparation programs leads to what I call the concrete slab mentality. And this is basically what happened, a story that I have read about what happened up at a military barracks in the US. It's a long story, but generally it talks about how 4 soldiers were put to guard a concrete slab before it set, so that the animals could not go around tramping on them. And that kind of practice prevailed on the barracks for a period of 85 years until a new commandant came in to say, why are you guarding this slab? And the result was that it was something that was just being left from one commandant to another without actually knowing what it was all about. And again, it also, another perspective would also be that some school leaders would fail to do things that are critical to their practices simply because they do not really understand what they are supposed to be doing. And another implication is also that there is no system in place for the selection of school leadership, because from
5 minutes, Private, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. So from the selection, you would see that it was haphazard without any proper guidelines and criteria. And finally, the majority of school leaders have not gone through any specific training for school leadership, which makes them to fail to actually manage to do the right things that would help them. For example, we are talking about teacher motivation, financial management, or ethical practices on how to handle certain issues. Next slide, please. So the challenges that we see are that school leaders are forced to learn by trial and error. And again, we also see that there is lack of continuity because most school leaders do not know what records to leave behind when they are moving from one school to another. And again, we also saw that there was also most school leaders combined with administrative work, which forces them to abandon their classes and go to attend to urgent matters in the office. And some also demonstrated that they lack stamp of authority, as they are not able to control their peers or to control staff under them, simply because they are in the leadership positions in acting capacity or just in name only. Next slide, please. So comparative reflections, we see that, for example, in Sweden, one has to apply to undergo, to become a head teacher. So they have to show interest. And then if they do not have any leadership qualifications, they are given a specific period of time to acquire the leadership qualifications. And in countries like South Africa and Kenya, the literature shows that there are certain programs, pre-appointment, as well as continuing professional development programs. Next slide, please. So just as suggestions for solutions, it would be proper to have a systematic procedures for the appointment of school leadership, so that at least one knows through whichever path they take. And I see that the continuing professional development framework is going to address this by asking by
2 minutes. You have 2 minutes, Private.
Thank you. By recommending paths that one can take either as a school leader or to continue in the academia, so that be able to get promoted as well. And again, we also need to develop a comprehensive induction program so that teachers or school leaders know what to do. And finally, I would love if we instilled, and this is on a personal level, a spirit of personal lifelong learning amongst the school leaders, so that leaders, if in the absence of these formal induction programs, they can sit down and read on their own. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Privy. You did really well, even on the time. You still have got, I need to stop my timer here because it will be going off any time, but that was superb. You've touched on quite a few very useful points regarding leadership in secondary schools, especially the public secondary schools here in Malawi. And I think you've painted quite an accurate picture of what's going on. Lots of teachers appointed as head teachers, but no training, and even the modality of appointing quite inconsistent. And I think the recommendations you are making are very useful. I think the CBD framework has been there for the past 3 years or so. I am not sure where we are in terms of making it operational, but definitely the recommendations you've made, I think, are useful. Learning even from other countries how they do it, that's also quite useful. So thank you so much for that. The next presenter is Joanne Kiernan. Joanne Kiernan is a trustee and education advisor for the Chacha Trust. The Chacha Trust, I think, is based in the UK and also here in Malawi. So over to you, Joanne.
Good afternoon from the UK. Good afternoon to Malawi, and good morning to the US. I hope you're all well. First of all, I would like to say thank you for inviting us to this webinar today. It's wonderful to be part of this community of educators and lifelong learners that we all are. I would also like to thank, before I start the presentation, the support from the Malawi government, MOEST, or the Ministry of Education as it now is, the Directorate of Teacher Education and Development, who we work closely with, as well as the Director of Basic Education and the Directorate of Inspectorate and Advisory Services. These are all wonderful government departments that Chacha has worked with over quite a number of years now. So to start this presentation, I'll introduce myself. I'm an educator in the UK. I started teaching in 1993 as a science teacher. I'm a qualified head teacher, and my specialism is special educational needs. I work around the UK helping schools, and I started working with Chacha about a year ago, and I was voted in as chair of Chacha this week, which is a great honour for me. So to start with, what I would like to do is talk a little bit about what the history and context of Chacha, so that you can all understand who we are as an organisation. We are a registered charity in the UK, and also we are registered in Malawi. And the reason why we say a legacy of hope is because the trust was founded by Kelvin Parker after a very tragic accident that happened to his wife and daughter when they were killed. And one of the legacies that came out of that was his wife and daughter's vision for providing books for underprivileged children in primary schools in Africa, and especially in Malawi. So that's where the vision and the legacy of hope began for our charity. Moving on, in the very beginning, the charity focused on delivering very high-end resources. Our focus was resources and making sure that they were culturally referenced and that were beautifully made so that children could really enjoy that literacy experience. And they were all put in some beautiful bright pink. As you can see within our branding, it's a bright pink branding. They were put in a Chacha chest and donated to primary schools in Malawi. And on the bottom there, you can see some of the things that we provided. We provided a dictionary that was between English and Chichewa. We had reading books, puzzles, posters, whiteboards, pens, stationery, and it all went in that chest. This it went on for quite some time. Oh, sorry, we've gone past one. Let me go back one. Let me go back there. And hopefully it's not going to jump anymore. Those resources were donated over a 9-year period, and it was time to evaluate how those resources were being used. And our in-country director, Natalie, who you can see on the screen there, who's lived in Blantyre for 15 years, and she's a highly skilled literary resource manager who's taught English as a second language, as an additional language, and has got a background in international primary education, had a look around to evaluate how our resources were being used. And the summary findings were that, fortunately, some of the chests had gone missing, the contents had gone missing, they'd been vandalised, or it'd been squirreled away really securely, but unused. And the conclusion of that evaluation was that the resources, no matter how well they were produced and how meaning the donations, they were actually accessible to most of the learners, and they were unable to read. Even the very first level readers and teachers were unclear how to use these resources following a structured literacy pathway. So following the evaluation, we decided that we needed to evolve as a business, as a charity. And this is where we started working fully in collaboration. So from 2016 through to September 2018, we started thinking quite clearly about a literacy programme, and worked with Emmanuel Teacher College that looked at a phased approach, and to work with some selected primary schools to support literacy acquisition through phonics, and working in partnership with ETTC on the Bridging the Gap programme. We were supplied with some graduate primary teachers as volunteers, and we worked with them to look at CPD and coaching by the trusts, the Cha-Cha staff. And of course, in Malawi, things changed. The National Reading Programme came online. And so we also evolved in line with the National Reading Programme and the phonetics that were being delivered through the NRP. And we supported the NRP with our next programme, which was the enhanced delivery of the NRP programme, to actually accelerate and improve those literacy outcomes for Standard 1 learners. And the main key to this is the child-centred pedagogical approach that we take on board to enable rapid acquisition of phonics. So the enhanced delivery of NRP, it's structured in a way so that graduate teachers have a professional CPD programme in the teaching of phonics, and the newly qualified teachers are given help in thinking about child-centred lesson creation and planning, the fundamentals of phonics, the fundamentals of applied formative assessment as you're working with young people, young learners, the group teaching pedagogy, which is so important to us at Cha-Cha, and professional support and development on the ground. So we have now a recruited volunteer literacy support specialist teachers, which are fully qualified graduate teachers who are actually delivering in government primary schools the enhanced delivery of NRP. So you can see just from that little evolution, the number of people who have been involved from the Malawi government all the way through to individual schools in supporting the enhanced delivery of NRP with Cha-Cha. We also provide operational support to our specialist teachers so that they feel that they're being supported effectively and creatively with formal lesson delivery of small group activities. And we've also got a really strong monitoring evaluation of learner outcomes. That is a real strength of our programme, so that we ensure that we are really keeping an eye on that legacy to honour Veronica and Charlotte's vision as we move forward. So post-lockdown, this is where we were just before lockdown in Malawi. So at the time of the closure, the enhanced delivery programme was across 10 schools in the southern region. and it was impacting over 4,000 learners, benefiting 23 newly qualified graduate teachers and veteran teachers with coaching and CPD opportunities. Target demographic is standard 1, but as we roll out the programme, we then move up the standards. So on the closure of lockdown, we were just starting to emerge into standard 3. And now I'd like to share with you some of our results, which I think are pretty impressive. So our results, and there are some important takeaways from this, is that as you can, this chart looks very busy, and I understand that. Along the bottom, we have the different schools, and along the top, we have average letter sound acquisition and average letter name acquisition. Letter name acquisition is in blue, letter sound acquisition is in red. And can you see along the bottom there, tracking in purple, that's the national average standard score from the combined letter name score that the government did from NRP, and that's the EGRA score. So the EGRA average is 8.3, and that's running along the bottom as the purple line. So you can see on there that we have
5 minutes. 5 minutes remaining.
Yes, we have a huge difference in acquisition of our results, and through this, you can see that we are getting rapid acquisition of young people's phonetic abilities, and we are really, really proud of these results and of the young learners that have improved their outcomes through standards 1, standard 2, and now into standard 3. The last slide is the close of play in September, just before lockdown. These are our last figures, and as you can see, the huge acquisition of phonetic knowledge. So, thinking about this, the how we do it is really important, and I think that quote there from Ewan McIntosh is really important, because the how is what is the heart of what Char does. And thinking about the how, we were asked by government post-lockdown to consider scale up, and as part of our strategy, what we wanted to do is consider what the objectives were for scale up and action areas. I'm more than happy to share our information with people if they want it. But what we're looking at here is ways in which Char can strategically enable a greater ability to work with more stakeholders in Malawi. And to do that, we want to strengthen our core programme through independent research, developing our strategic expertise, ensuring our sustainability through funding, working with and supporting veteran teachers and Ministry of Education staff, and increasing our funding to further expand our programmes into literacy and also numeracy outcomes for learners. So, takeaways for yourselves. We have got some research questions that we are interested in, and we are looking for partners to put forward research proposals. So that is one takeaway for participants today. And we've got some other takeaways for you, which is, if you're interested in fundraising, please get in touch. If you're interested in being a volunteer or adding to the capacity of our board, please get in touch. And if you want to spread the word, get in touch. There's lots of ways in which people who are interested can get involved.
Can you start?
And to finish, let's finish with the children. This is a cacophony of learning for you, and I'm just going to let it play, because this is Char in action and the young people learning.
Very good. Yeah. Again. Good. Can you bend the waistband? Again. Good. Ruby, can you?
So there's my contact details. We have got a website and we are on social media, and I look forward to hopefully some of you getting in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for that really fascinating presentation on an equally fascinating initiative that Chacha is doing in Malawi. There was a video earlier this year that went viral on Malawian social media. It showed a teacher who was very creative, creating all kinds of toys, I think, and games for teachers, and teachers as well as non-teachers were very fascinated because this was a teacher who was talented and dedicated. And we learned that this teacher was working for Chacha. So some great work that you're doing there with teachers and with learners, and focusing on quite a profound level of work in education. I mean, literacy is the foundation of everything. And that's why the Malawi government has the National Reading Program. And it's very good to hear that Chacha's efforts are going towards helping with the National Reading Program. So thank you, Joanne. Okay, so that's the end of my moderation role. I'm going to hand over to the next moderator who will moderate the next series of presentations, and that is Dr. Elizabeth Meke. Dr. Meke is Acting Director, the Center for Education Research and Training, Chancellor College in the University of Malawi. Over to you, Dr. Meke.
Thank you so much, Steve. Yeah, thank you so much, Steve, for moderating the first 3 presentations. Hello. Yeah, thank you so much, Steve, for moderating the 3 presentations. And thank you, the presenters, for a job so well done. We are continuing with the presentations, and I'm going to moderate the next 3. The first one will be presented by Dr. Cassandra Williams. Cassandra is a professor of Africana Studies in the Indiana University. She is the chief designer for the Educational Innovation 360 and e-instructional coaching system. Cassandra's presentation is titled From Awareness to Action, Transforming a School's Culture. Let's welcome Cassandra as she articulates the benefits of a positive school climate and culture in her presentation.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully I'm not. Okay, I'm gonna try this. Buli Buani. Did I say it right? I hope I said it right. How are you guys doing? I'm glad to hear the great presentations. I've heard so many exceptional presentations, and you're right, we cannot wait. Now is time for do. So I say, repeat it with me. Now is the time to do. And we have to do non-traditional things to get untraditional results. And so we're gonna work through that. And hopefully, like I said, I will hope to spark the next generation of future leaders and future learners to change the dynamic of what's happening today. So my presentation today is from awareness to action, transforming a school culture and thinking of non-traditional ways to do it. To let you know a little bit about me, my name is Cassandra Williams. Like you said, I'm a professor at Indiana University, but my company supports teachers in the classroom. So you know how teachers struggle from year to year to keep on track, to keep growing? My company, Educational Innovation 360, supports teachers through video while giving ongoing professional development through the year. So it helps with teacher retention, ongoing growth, and administrators' updates. But what we know is when teachers are valued, of course, when they're getting compensation too, but when we show the teacher community that we care, they're more likely to stay and more likely to do the very best. So that's little bit about my company. So today, the goal is to talk about culture and climate in the schools. How do we improve or push the areas of growth and kind of identify what are teachers thinking and how do we do more to dive into the community to see how can we utilize a resource to help benefit the whole community. And so I asked, what is the school climate? Think about what do we have in the hallways? What pictures, what images of students that they see every day? What books do we have that are inclusive? What are the policies and safeguard? And we definitely talk about the rules, the beliefs, the patterns, the teaching culture, the songs, the dances, the welcome, the song that students sing when they are welcomed into the school. And we have to really think about how we're doing this, what our school does that is privy to our school, and people and the community and everybody loves us for that. And so we know, of course, the school experience can have a big, major impact on our students' daily lives, and positive school culture, of course, has been linked to student development. And so we call it the way we do things around here. So I often ask you, what are you doing that separates your school from another? How are you involving the community? How are you involving the parents? Like I said, this is the year of do. And you may think, oh my God, this may be a chaotic year, but we want to make sure we are trying to do something and to engage the three factors. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about them more. So I often tell you the cultures. So here's the level of cultures. What do you see when you first visit the school? What are your biggest impressions? What are your biggest takeaways? Does a parent welcome you? Does a teacher welcome you to the school? How are we gauging the community? What are our values and what are our student beliefs and about the school? And if you don't know, ask them. They will tell you the things that need to be fixed, the things that need to be changed. I think I said this the last time. When you walk into a school, the first time, that's when you really get to embrace and just smell what's going on in school. You see what's going on in school. But definitely do that and have somebody at your school do that, whether it's the principal, the leader, whether it's the teacher that's doing that, or whether it's the students that are doing that, and have them write down some things. And I say that because after a week or a month of being in school, everything's kind of like ugly wallpaper. You know how you go into your new house or something and you have this ugly, hideous wallpaper, but after a month, it kind of goes away and it's invisible? That's how our schools are. So make sure the first walk in the school, you have students identify the areas of need or something that they see that needs to be fixed right away. The parents talk about how, same thing, and the adults do the same thing. Then you could get a pulse of what your school needs right away. And that should be your focus at the beginning of the year. And I often ask everybody, and I think I've said this before, if we can wave a magic wand, what were the things that you would fix? And so you take your stakeholders and you ask them that. And they're saying, well, let me tell you, when I walked in, our stairs were not clean. Question number 2 is, what solution would you provide? Well, my sister and brother can come and clean the entry level. And so now we're taking a community approach to supporting the school system. And many times that's what it takes. I know we try to rely on external factors, and you're right, we need to hold them accountable, but there's so much that we can do for ourselves to support ourselves in this matter. And like I said, the second thing is, what can we fix? How can we fix it? And solutions will come in with some of the things that they see that needs improvement. And then you ask them, why do you come every day? Ask your students, what brings you back here every day? Your teachers, why? And they will start to share with you their personal love for the school and why they come. And when you know that, and you have taken note of why your students come back to school, why your teachers are coming and your leaders are coming back to school, then you can start infusing that into the school and the school culture. For example, we had a teacher that said, I come to school because we get, I get to do music and I get to participate in music. And I love music and I would like to do an after school program with music for our students. Now, me as a leader, I'm thinking, whoa, how can I tap? If this is why you come to school every day and this is what you love so much, how can I extend that and give you maybe some type of sort of stipend or funding or community grants or something to get you to do that more? So at the end of the year, this teacher was not only playing his guitar in the lunchroom for our students during lunch, but he had after school training to teach students how to play the guitar. Now, we didn't have the funding at the beginning of the year, but I definitely looked for the funding and the support within the community. So we had donations of guitar. We had parents coming out, giving students guitars on a temporary basis, making sure they take care of it. So I often say this is the year of do, and we need to do more for our babies and our community and our teachers to make sure they stay at the school site. And so I ask these questions for school leaders, okay? Do you really know your teachers? Do you know their individual interests, what they bring? Because I'll tell you one thing, if you invest in me as a person and you actually get to know me and identify the areas of strength, I'm going to do whatever it takes. Teachers are people pleasers. I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure I meet the needs of you and your school. So keep that in mind. Yes, we do want money. Teachers do want more money and education, but there's little things that we can do to value our teachers. And also, of course, we need to explain the non-negotiables. What are some things that definitely needs to be done? How can we create leaders within a school? How can teachers wear different hats and become leaders within the school? And so teachers can also do some of the things that the leaders are doing, the principals are doing. They can find funding, they can find grants. And how do you allow teachers to share ideas with you? That is so important. We don't want to create the barrier to where we are the leader and you are the teacher. We want to create a space where we're on the equal level playing field, where we're willing to support you and what you do. And that's so important. And I often say we have to tap into teacher talents. We have to create opportunities for them. And then we have to start these projects. And it starts with the community and the school. So what will you add to the school year? We have to have a growth mindset. Teachers bring unique skills. Get out of your comfort zone. Get out of the ivory tower, out from your desk, and start being humble and walking the classrooms and walking your community. A lot of our resources, we came from community ideas, parent ideas, student ideas. So keep that in mind when we think of how do we shift the culture and how do we transform this idea of what it means to support the community. We have to continue doing the hard work and kind of going above and beyond to transform our current systems. I often say building relationships is a lot of work, but we could do so much more when we actually seek out our community members and our teachers to start those relationships. And people don't understand
You have 5 minutes, Cassandra.
Thank you, 5 minutes. So people don't realize the amount of work that it takes to build relationships. So what I do personally, I have a spreadsheet of all of my important people that I definitely, and that's everybody in the school, from the janitor, custodian, anybody who has anything to say in the school. And so I mark what they bring to the table. So if I had conversation with Sherry or something about her child or something, or how I could support their children, I write that down. So I said, I talked to Sherry, her students, how I know her child's name, so let me write that down. And I practice that because that personal relationships, you're building, I'd say putting deposits in their emotional bank accounts and letting them know you care. And I often think I have never learned from somebody I don't like. So continue building relationships. That's so important. And it's so key to any school relationship. I have a couple more slides. And so school climate. Here are the 12 dimensions of school climate. I'm not going to go over it, but I do want to say, like I said, when people feel safe and people feel connected and you have built a relationship, people are willing to do 10 times more for you and support you throughout the year. And so some of these are the attitudes that we use when working with all of our students. And this is the big takeaway. I say the circle right there, there's the teacher in the middle. And so we have to think about these things, the content that our teachers are producing, their goals. What is the consistency? Why can't we bring the community members? What is the real life application that teachers have to take to bring in to the school day? How are you getting family support? How are you getting learner support? What scaffolds are you bringing? How are you connecting the community to the college and the college to K-12 sector? And think about, what do your students bring to the table every day? What do the learners bring to the table every day? Use that and use that to your benefit and create norms around them. So here is what I call the transition for success. Here is the process. We have to definitely prepare, get all our information, our surveys from our stakeholders, and see what the immediate need is. We take that evaluation and we understand and we do. The action is to do. Now, it takes a multi-pronged approach. It takes the government. Somebody needs to continuously to put pressure on the government, right? I know this sounds kind of crazy, but this is the time to do. So one of your teachers, one of your teacher leaders, every bi-weekly, then monthly, constantly, what's the government's response? How are we supporting teachers? And an ongoing yearly process. 2, how are we tapping to our businesses? We have to tap and make sure we meet the needs of our business who are taking from us. That's bi-weekly, that's monthly. We're constantly talking to the businesses. How are you supporting our community? What are you doing to make sure you employ the people in the community? And so that is cyclical, as well as the community. How are you supporting our kids? And so this is a multi-pronged approach, but it is a way we can support our community and our future generation. And I
Be wrapping up.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So yeah, and that's pretty much it. I want to definitely say thank you, but I think we can do much more than what we're doing, and relying on 1 or 2 people is not enough. I think if you can get your community on board, you can change the generation for the future.
Thank you so much, Cassandra, for that very well synthesized presentation on what makes a good school culture and the climate. I think we have learned a lot from that presentation. You have taken us through the current aspects and of course the different aspects of school climate and culture. We take it that every stakeholder has a role to play to make the school a comfortable place to be, and indeed to make it conducive to the teaching and the learning process. School administrators, teachers, learners, school committees, parents, and indeed the general public, they all have to ensure that all of the dimensions of school climate and the culture that you've talked about are well taken care of. They all have to create an environment for learning that optimizes the ability of the students to learn. It's a year of do, indeed, as you put it. Once again, thank you, Prof, for your wonderful presentation. Just a reminder to our participants, if you have questions and comments, please let's continue writing them on the chat section. I think our esteemed presenters will respond to them. We now turn to our next presentation, which will be done by Dr. Jessie Kitsanzo-Sto. Dr. Jessie is an associate professor and chair of the education department at Amherst College in Michigan. Actually, Dr. Jessie is a Malawian, and she's very familiar with the Malawian education system and practices. Her presentation is on the high leverage assessment practices after distance learning, when schools open after these long closures. what will be our assessment practices like? Will it be business as usual or we need to adapt? Let's hear from what Dr. Jesse has to say. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. Jesse to the floor.
Greetings, colleagues. My name is Dr. Jesse Storr, and today I'll be talking about 5 high leverage practices that we will need when students return back from distance learning. These are best practices for all times, regardless of school interruptions due to COVID or otherwise. Before we dive in, here are 4 things we know to be true. Number 1, we are not born expert teachers. We become through learning and reflective habits. Number 2, practice makes habit. We don't simply become expert teachers because we have been doing the same things for many years. Routine expertise is effective only when nothing changes. But in teaching, nothing hardly stays the same. Number 3, after distance learning is over, more than ever, teachers must become experts at adaptation. And lastly, number 4, we will definitely need remedial instruction when students return to school. These 4 facts should compel us to become adaptive teachers. So what do expert adaptive teachers do? The first question they ask is, what has changed and how can I adapt? So they monitor learning to notice both student thinking and the blind spots in their learning. Monitoring and noticing student thinking are building blocks for flexibly using knowledge and skills to be an adaptive expert. Adaptive teachers also give helpful feedback to students, feedback that is actionable and beyond the percentage of correct answers. Another important characteristic of adaptive teachers is the belief that student understanding can and will grow. They have passion for teaching and they do what is necessary to scaffold student understanding. After distance learning, practices of expert teachers will be characterized by information-rich assessments and targeted instruction. Here's why. Emergency distance learning will inevitably lead to exponential growth of classroom inequities. Teachers will need to support the learning growth of students who had access to technology, tutors under ahead, students who had access to only some of the printed materials, students who had no opportunity to continue school, students with a range of disabilities who most likely did not get the support they needed during distance learning. This new reality calls for assessment practices that will efficiently show areas that instruction need to target. I will now share with you the 5 high leverage practices to get such work done. Assessment practice 1, item response analysis. This test analysis is done after students have taken the test and the teacher has marked the test. The teacher summarizes the responses for each question as shown in this table. Student names in one column against question numbers or items. In this example, 1 is for correct answers and 0 is for incorrect answers. This table shows you that only one student answered question 2 correctly. All students answered question 6 correctly. The last row is the proportion of students who had correct answers. If at least 90% of the students give a correct answer for the question, consider not reteaching the whole class. You use this table to really make decisions about remedial teaching and how you should spend your time on what concepts you need to reteach. Practice 2 is about being intentional about the balance of depth of knowledge levels in your test. So what is depth of knowledge? It is a way of aligning cognitive processing ceiling with the curriculum. It should not be confused with difficulty. It is descriptive and focuses on skills that are needed to complete a task. Many countries use depth of knowledge to match cognitive demands of a test and the curriculum. As a rule of thumb, assessments should be 50% at reproduction, about 33% at application level, and about 16% at the high levels of strategic and extended thinking. Let us dig a little deeper into these depths of knowledge by Norman Webb. Recall and reproduction require recalling information, such as identifying elements of music or labeling parts of a plant. It is really about doing simple skills. Half of the marks on your test would need to be on recall and reproduction because students have lost a lot of learning. Level 2 is application, and it requires students to make decisions and have multiple steps or cognitive processes. 33% of your marks on your test should come from this level. And level 3, strategic thinking, calls for deep understanding as exhibited through planning and using evidence. The cognitive demands at level 3 are complex and abstract, so only 16% should be at these higher levels. And level 4, extended thinking, calls for connections, relating ideas within and among content areas. Due to the complexity of cognitive demands at this level, completing level 4 tasks often require an extended period of time. You will notice that the higher levels most often include and require the lower levels of depth of knowledge. So the 3 to 2 to 1 ratio helps us to pass out the student skills so that each student has a chance to show what they know. Practice 3 is conducting an error analysis to see what type of errors students are making. There are 4 types of errors. Factual errors are errors that are due to a lack of factual information, such as vocabulary. Procedural errors are errors that are due to the incorrect performance of steps in a process. For example, an error where when students are doing mathematical tasks, they could make an error on where to put a decimal point when multiplying decimal numbers. Conceptual errors are due to misconceptions or a faulty understanding of underlying principles and ideas, and when to apply those ideas. For instance, a faulty understanding of the relationship between a square and a rectangle. We also have careless errors that are not really a result of limited understanding. They could be because the student was tired or disrupted. Knowing the types of errors will help us to answer the question, how much time should I allocate for remediation? To identify types of errors, we must also pay attention to how we mark student work. So we are not just looking at seeing whether the answer is correct or not. One way to identify error types is to mark students' work in the same direction, following the same steps that students wrote their answers. In mathematics, if students used strategies whereby they wrote their answers from right to left, marking should also be done digit by digit from right to left. Not the number, but digit by digit, the same way that students wrote it. If students use division strategies where they write answers from left to right, you should also mark their answers digit by digit from left to right. The key is to mimic students' thinking to easily see where they first make their mistake. You have to identify the type of errors they make so you can design targeted instruction. If students get 3 to 5 errors of the same type, then it is an error pattern, and such error patterns will not correct themselves. They will need remediation and targeted instruction. Instead of reteaching everything, we will not have time for that. We will be trying to teach work that's approximately 1.5 years in just 1 year. So we need to identify just the specifics we need to work on. Take a second and imagine going to a doctor when you feel sick. An effective treatment will target the specific cause of your illness. Eyeglasses, however good they are, will not treat malaria because they do not target malaria. Error analysis is for remedial instruction. And error analysis, there are practices that really work the same way as when you go to the doctor. Since conceptual errors are caused by limited understanding of underlying principles, they require a great deal of reteaching. You would notice that strategies for addressing procedural errors that target specific mistakes would not address conceptual errors. Knowing steps is different from understanding the concept. Error analysis points you to the right targeted instruction, the targeted instruction that will actually be effective. The fourth practice is using inherently differentiated tasks. These are tasks that are accessible to all students, and they challenge students with wide-ranging abilities. When you pose such tasks, students of different abilities find different ways to begin. They use varying strategies and end up with different products. They are not one-size-fits-all kind of tasks. Inherently differentiated tasks are necessary because students will be at different levels, and they should all feel accomplished. They should also feel challenged, regardless of who was teaching them when school was interrupted. And the last practice is giving useful feedback. The key word here is useful. Thinking about assessment, the word assess comes from the Latin verb assedere, meaning to sit with. In assessment, one is supposed to sit with the learner. This implies assessment is something we do with and for students, not to students. Being told that you earned 75% is good, yes, but being what one needs to do to get better is really necessary. You have to give students feedback, and it must answer the following questions. What can I, the student, do now? What do I need to work on to grow my understanding? Where can I find the resources my teacher recommends for me to accomplish these goals? This is what characterizes useful feedback. It is something students can use. It is actionable, and it is communicated in student-friendly language. Just telling them the marks doesn't tell them how to get better. High leverage assessments are inherently differentiated, and they make visible all skill levels. They provide useful feedback to both the teacher and the student, and they give a clearer path of targeted instruction. The practices I have discussed here are item response analysis, the 3-to-2-to-1 balance of depth of knowledge, conducting error analysis, using inherently differentiated tasks, and giving useful feedback to the students. These are just some examples of high leverage practices that will get us started when we get back. Now, in closing, I would like to remind you, my colleagues, that teaching must move with time and circumstances. Doing these practices is not easy, especially if they are new, but they are doable. Good assessment practices will guide us in becoming adaptive expert teachers. And for adaptive expert teachers, moving forward will be recursive and nonlinear. Sometimes we'll fail, but you don't stop trying because you have failed once. Because at the end, these high leverage practices are very productive, and they are going to help us deal with a curriculum deficit in the short period of time that will be given when students get back to school. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jessie, for finishing, I think, in 2 minutes to time. Now, that was a very powerful practices after distance learning. You have taken us through a number of practices and the strategies that will help us adapt to the new realities after the distance learning that our learners have been through during the school closures as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I definitely concur with you when you talk of the distance learning leading to classroom inequalities amongst our learners. We know some learners have made progress with distance learning, while others have not due to the levels of access to the platforms for the distance learning. Hence, this presentation is really very, very important for teachers to know how they are going to deal with such gaps when the learners return to school. Maybe some questions we might wish to ponder on as food for thought as we wait for the reopening of schools from your presentation could be, how prepared are we as teachers to use good assessment practices to leverage the inequalities in our classrooms? And indeed, what assessment practices will we use to make us become adaptive expert teachers? So as we think about these and the other questions, let's turn to our next presentation. Dr. Chad McGrone is our next presenter. Dr. Chad is a co-founder of Teachers to Teachers Global. His presentation is titled Spreading the News, What We Are Learning from Our Thought Leaders in Mathematics Education. In his presentation, he will be highlighting why changing the way we teach mathematics is critical to equity and social justice. Let's welcome Dr. Chad as he takes the floor.
Thank you. I'm always excited to talk about teaching mathematics differently. So thank you all for indulging me. And let me see what's going on here with my slideshow here. There we go. So in math, in the United States, we know how to teach mathematics differently. We've been thinking about it for decades now and writing about it. Unfortunately, that doesn't always make its way to the classroom. But at the highest levels, at the university levels, we have people who really are thinking differently about teaching mathematics. And what Teachers to Teachers is doing is spreading that knowledge. I personally think mathematics is the key to social justice and equity. And it's also an important component of just overall learning, because I think if a person's taught to learn mathematics differently, if they're taught to think critically, to question everything they hear and prove it the way mathematicians do, then they're going to have more likely to stand up for themselves if an outsider comes in and says, oh, you need to do something this way. So I think that it's really critical. The thinking that develops in mathematics is an important first step. Additionally, I think mathematics drives literacy, because you could be trying to solve a problem in your community with math, and you need to read about the problem, and then you solve it and you're going to want to write about it. Seldom do people just read and go, oh my gosh, I need to do a math problem after reading that book. It was just so good. And so I want to switch that a little bit. So what we're doing at Teachers to Teachers is we're really connecting with the people that have written the books about mathematics education. Here are just a few people that are working with us. Arthur Powell is a person who really wrote the book about ethnomathematics and about how teaching looks differently. Peg Smith is about task design. You just heard a little bit of a talk about why tasks are an important component. She helped formulate some of those ideas. And what is happening is these people are meeting with our staff in Latin America, so that the knowledge is getting to Latin America, and then people in Latin America are learning from themselves. And right now we're focusing on what great teaching looks like. In 2014, the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics published a set of guidelines, really. It's to say, how do I make the connection between what we're learning in the Common Core and what great teaching looks like into the classroom? And how can we make that accessible for teachers? And there are these 8 components that we are digging into. We're spending at least an hour and a half as a staff talking about this. And then that group goes, you'll see this a little bit more. They take it to Guatemala. And I just want to list them off. We're not going to talk about every single one, again, because that takes a long time. But one is establish mathematical goals and focused learnings. That means I want to know what I'm teaching for this day and I want to know what supports that. So what do my kids need to know what I'm teaching? Implement tasks that promote reasoning. This is something you just heard about, right? We want mathematical tasks that are engaging and cause people to think. So for instance, instead of saying, what is 8 plus 5? I might say that Elizabeth and Justin went fishing, and Elizabeth caught more fish than Justin. Together, they have 13. How many different ways can they get 13 fish? Already, I bet some of you are thinking, what are the answers to that? And then you have different answers and you argue with each other. That's where math learning happens. Use connections to make mathematical representations, facilitate meaningful mathematical discourse. We'll talk about that more. Pose purposeful questions, build procedural fluency from understanding, support struggle, and elicit evidence of student thinking. You've already seen bits of how that happens. We really dig in what that looks like in the mathematics classroom. The first step is to do these learning labs. And here are two pictures of two of them that are happening virtually. And I want to point out this guy is the guy who wrote the book on productive struggle. This woman who's part of every single one of these is the person who motivated the book being written. She was the president of NCTM at the time. This person, Kim Mara-Leong, wrote a book called Making Student Thinking Visible. So these are pretty high-level people that our staff here is working with. On the next learning lab, we have Arthur Powell, one of his graduate students. Arthur Powell wrote the book about ethnomathematics. The next step, though, is for our staff then to take this to their teachers that they're working with. Because I believe that it's more powerful. So for instance, in Malawi, it's much more powerful if a teacher in Malawi hears about teaching and learning from someone who's from Malawi, as opposed to a white man from the United States who says, oh, you have to teach the way I teach. And so I know that. I also know we know what teaching looks like. So my job is to share this knowledge with you all, a group of leaders there, and then for you all to take it and make it your own in the same way we want to make mathematics our own. And we're seeing great things happen. In every single one of those things, the role of the teacher is different. If you guys think back to your math class, who did all the talking? Probably the teacher, right? What was your role? To listen, maybe try to understand. But we're really flipping it. Like I have a list here of some of the things. The teachers, here are descriptors of the teachers' behaviors. Teachers are supposed to provide, they're supposed to ask, they're supposed to connect student-generated representations. They're supposed to anticipate when the students will struggle. They're supposed to establish clear learning goals and select tasks that are important. They're supposed to ask questions and focus students' attention to support them. Those are all sort of supportive things, right? Not doing necessarily. The students are supposed to make sense of what they see. They're supposed to generate and demonstrate and struggle and ask questions and persevere and engage and connect. That's a very active student. Think about being in one of those classes. Can you just zone out? There's no way, because you're already connecting and engaging. And that's the kind of shift we're seeing. So you see here, this teacher is just super excited about the task he has provided for the participants in his workshop. This teacher is the teacher, but she's at the back of the class because she is guiding, she's facilitating. We even talk about saying, let's not call ourselves teachers. Let's call ourselves something else, because teacher implies that I'm driving it. I don't want to be driving it, I want to be guiding it. And what might that look like? Some people say I'm a pilot. Here's the student role. You see, these are active students. These look like classes, math classes you guys have been a part of. Hopefully they do. But you can see they're all engaged. They're all participating. And I particularly like this because these are girls feeling empowered. They see that they can do more than work at the market or be a housewife. One of the things that we're doing, I think it's an important topic that we talked about in particular, is what is meaningful mathematical discourse? In a classroom, how does that look? And so I wanted to elaborate on that. Again, we spent an hour and a half really digging into this topic. But some of the things that are important components of this are students learn to share what their understanding is. So if you think about these topics within the context of student learning and being critical thinkers, what are some of the key things? Imagine, in your community, someone comes in and says, oh my gosh, we need to open up a whole new set of drugstores. And because I have money and I am from the culture of power, you have to listen to me. well, what do the locals need to speak for themselves? They need to be able to share their understandings with each other. They need to learn to construct convincing arguments. This is what happens when students are in these kinds of math classes. They listen to constructive feedback to make adjustments to their understandings. Because people make mistakes, that's fine. We have to listen to each other. They learn to express ideas in ways that others can understand. That's a really critical point. And to me, the most important thing is they learn to take perspectives of others. Because when you've said something that doesn't make sense to me initially, and I've worked to listen to it and understand it, then I'm able to take your perspective. And these are the kinds of things that we're working on in our learning labs regularly. And to be honest, I would love to be doing these with a group of teachers in Malawi. So when the time comes, when you are ready, let me know, and we could be working through some of these things as well, bringing in some of these same experts to share the knowledge. And when it's safe to travel, I'm happy to go there. So that's it. Please do check out our website here, tdtglobal.org. Someone reminded me that we would love to have Twitter followers and Facebook followers. So please check us out and follow us. We do have a lot happening. Even today, we have a global math story that we're presenting on Facebook Live. It's an hour long, and it's for people to listen to and then think about the way they could do math differently in their communities. Thank you.
Oh, already done.
Yeah, I'm a quick talker.
Thank you so much for that very excellent presentation on the teaching of mathematics and how we can make it effective. Dr. Chad took us through the components of effective teaching and learning of mathematics, of which if teachers were to follow them, in mathematics lessons, as is the case in most of our schools. He has articulated the role of the teacher versus that of the student in the teaching and learning of maths, and how teachers can facilitate meaningful mathematical discourse. Thanks again, Dr. Chad, for enlightening us on this. And indeed, you are very much welcome to work with our teachers in Malawi. They will learn a lot from you. With Dr. Chad's presentation, we've now come to the end of the presentation session. And so I now call upon Professor Clifford Sykes, our discussant, to tie up the loose ends from the 6 papers that have been presented today. Prof. Clifford is a professional educator in the fine and performing arts Flint in Michigan. He is a member of the directors of the Consortium of International Management Policy and Development Sympathy.
Unmute. Okay, good. Now can you hear me? Are we good? Can you hear me? Good. Okay. First of all, good
sure, we can hear you.
Good. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. I hope you're having a great day. First, I'd like to start off by thanking Dr. Mary for giving me this opportunity to be with such a great group of professional scholars and educators. This has been an awesome presentation. And of course, I have the awesome job of combining all of this in about 5 minutes when you all have had 15. So bear with me. I've had to take just a couple of highlights from each of your presentations and try to put it all together. So first of all, in the previous hour or so, we've listened to some very powerful and formative education challenges, suggestions, options, and solutions, to which I will try to highlight and summarize. And although most of these issues were specific to Malawi, we find in deeper looking that they are pretty much universal. In Professor Thawangji's presentation with the challenges regarding teacher motivation, retention, and attrition, we are all probably all over the world going through some of those challenges. But he's given us the theoretical framework and said, in fact, that they are universal issues. And out of our basic needs, using Maslow's law to explain one of the reasons that teachers leave the profession, because simply they aren't being treated fairly and aren't being paid commensurate with their training and education. Another issue facing schools worldwide is the issue of school leadership. As Professor Mchanga informs us, and how leadership is identified, selected, trained, and assigned to a post. In Malawi, there seems to be no definite path to leadership, whereas in the US and other countries, you can actually go to university and train and become certified and degreed in school leadership. But it seems that lately in Malawi, the ISEM program is taking up that challenge, and we hope that they're successful with that. The suggestions made by Professor Mchanga are fairly standard in most well-organized school leadership programs. And this is a problem Malawi will have to solve if education is to live up to its promise of a better life for everyone, for all citizens. Both in structure and in formal evaluations, Professor Kiernan informs us of the growing success of the Char-Char program, very exciting program, named after Charlotte Parker, and is the Char-Char Trust for Advancement in Education in Africa. In Malawi, primarily procuring and delivering high quality learning materials in primary schools. And as of March 2020, this year, when the lockdown occurred all over the world, Char-Char program was involved in over 10 schools, affecting over 4,000 learners and a combination of 60 or more veteran and graduate teachers, many of whom are volunteers, to go into the rural areas. And evaluations show that a high continuation of student retention and rapid acceleration of phonetic acquisition. Now, a side note, growing up in primary school in Kansas City, Missouri, here in the US, phonics was absolutely the way to teach. And very few of my classmates come out not being good readers. That's very important, phonics. And so we're excited to hear that that program is going on in Malawi and in the UK. Also, it's focusing equally on the, as intense on the related skills such as speaking, listening, comprehension, writing, increased learner skills, and primary note as the 6 action areas that address and evaluate at each step. And some of those are the phonics and numeracy, teaching, training, and mentoring, professional development, capacity building and district staff, national, and district school policy, and the policy that strengthens, revises, trains, enforces, and then reevaluates. Data-driven assessments, monitoring, and adaptive management. This is a model blueprint that will help any school to grow if you have the personnel to implement it. If schools have a plan and the professional staff to implement that plan, another important ingredient, Professor Williams informs us, is school climate and culture. Very important. She informs us that school climate affects every aspect of a school and delineates the 12 dimensions of school climate, as well as the 5-stage school improvement process, which is designed as a continuous cycle of implementation and re-evaluation for teachers. School leaders should constantly question, do they know the teacher's strengths and talents? How are the teachers able to share their ideas with the school leader? And if the school leader, in fact, listens, are they giving up their control? Again, this is another well-organized, tried and true program that we can all benefit from, which, as she addresses some of the challenges we have previously discussed. And Professor Williams' passion is highly contagious. High leverage assessment practices after distant learning. What we know for sure, a very powerful way to start off, because we're used to saying practice makes perfect. But of course, Professor Storer tells us practice makes habit. Practice, and after distant learning, teachers must become experts at adaptation, because this is changing everything, as we are all quite familiar. So more than ever, teachers, adaptive teachers, must monitor learning, observe student thinking, have good, accurate assessment practices, give helpful feedback, and be passionate about teaching. After distance learning, independent learning must be used to help close the gap, pinpointing specific needs and point to resources and group learnings, everything that our learners need to catch up after this change that we are all going through. Teachers and teaching must change and move with the times. And finally, global teachers to teachers. Dr. McGlone is spreading the news of what we are learning from thought leaders in mathematics who are changing the way math is taught and why it is critical to equity and social justice. They're involving some of the top-notch thinkers in mathematics and innovators in the country. They're focusing on 8 primary issues, some of which are building procedural fluency from conceptual understanding, support productive struggle in learning math, elicit and use evidence of student thinking, and implement tasks that promote reasoning and problem solving. Dr. McGlone is recommending principles to actions, ensuring mathematical success for all, a guide for innovative and innovation in teaching math. This concludes my summary, and once again, thanks to Dr. Mowry for allowing me to be the discussant. And my final word to all: think global, act local. Thank you.
Wow, that was powerful, Professor Sykes. Thank you very much. So during this time, we have a few minutes and would like to use those few minutes to ask some questions that were addressed before when we had another webinar. And these are important questions that came up, and we wanted to see if there've been any updates. So I would like to call on Dr. Limbani Sabato to be ready, and also Dr. Tamara Foley. So Dr. Sabato, a question came up. And by the way, Dr. Sabato is country director for Educans, and they're doing a lot of activity in Malawi. I mean, he's in the news a lot with just coming out with a lot of activities to facilitate with education, and we appreciate your efforts, Dr. Sabato. So a question that came up, Dr. Sabato, it says, during this pandemic, what interventions have been done to address learners with disabilities, like the deaf and the blind, for them to access education like their counterparts in similar situations, pertaining to the radio and internet programs?
Yeah, indeed. Thanks a lot for that question. And also just to say thanks a lot to our colleagues who managed to ask questions as a way of feedback. I would like to indeed say that I think issues of students with disabilities or children with special needs is a great issue in Malawi, because we noticed that not much has been done, particularly on the programs that are being offered on the radio, as well as the programs that are being offered online through the Ministry of Education website. The ministry was expected also to print some materials which would be disability sensitive. But as of now, this program has not been rolled out. I had a discussion with the director
Okay.
an area of concern, and we need to strongly advocate so that at least something is done.
Wonderful. And while you're still here, Dr. Sabato, here's another question. So during this pandemic, for those parents with access only to mobile phones, has this resource been used to reach out to the parents by collecting their phone numbers and sending learning materials to them via WhatsApp or other means so that they can use for their children? Has this been researched as a possibility to continue learning?
This area is, I think the suggestion in that question is really great, but we haven't done research in that area. I know that a number of parents may have gadgets that can be used by the learners. But again, I think this is something that we would need to take up with the authorities. Particularly, I think the government needs to ensure that the guidelines also target the parents so that they should be available to assist their children while at home. But again, I think we can still say that, especially in rural areas, very few parents would have gadgets that would really facilitate learning through online. And also in terms of availability of internet connection, it would be an issue in those rural remote areas. But I think the suggestion to do research, but also make recommendations in this area is really great. It's something that we need to take up with authorities. As educants, we are planning to have with the new.
Okay, let's see. All right, looks like he's in a bad spot. All right, so let's see. Sorry about that. I know that Dr. Sabato would love to finish the response, but connectivity issues. So hopefully he can join us back in a minute.
Dr. I think he's back.
Oh,
there he
good.
is.
All right,
Yeah,
go ahead, Dr.
I'm
Sabato.
there, yes. Yeah.
Go ahead. Mhm.
Yes, so I was saying that in general, this is something that we would like to take up with the Ministry of Education. And educants, we are already booking an appointment with the new Minister of Education, Honorable Nyaronje, and we would like to ensure that this issue is taken up, particularly providing guidance to parents in terms of how they can use the facilities that they have to be able to support their children. I think they say sharing is caring, so I think the parents also need to be taught that this is something that they can do to support the children learning at home.
Okay, and this is the last question for you, Dr. Sabato.
Okay.
This one says, is anyone studying the effects of COVID-19 on the health of grandparents or providing additional support to households that are headed by the elderly?
Good question, interesting question. However, I think that as of now, we don't have much information. This is maybe an area that we can encourage higher education institutions and also research institutions to take up this. But so far, I think the programs that are being done are focusing more on the learners, the teachers, and less about the role of parents, grandparents, and communities. But this is something that we need to ensure that we target as well. Last week, we had the Minister of Health issuing some guidelines so that grandparents or people that are older than 60 years are accommodated in the preventive measures. But this was more to do with the COVID-19 preventive measures rather than the role of grandparents in supporting the children learning at home. But I think it's also an interesting question that we might need to take up.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, Dr. Sabato. So there's one more question, and this one was directed towards Dr. Foley. Dr. Tamara Foley is an educational consultant, and she is the CEO of Education for All. Dr. Foley, if you can mute yourself. So Dr. Foley had joined us in the previous webinar, and she had very powerful input in the chats. And so when we looked at the comments and we saw that there was a lot of feedback, and also we had additional emails and further questions about what her input was. So we thought we invite her back so that she can give us a little more information and give us direction. So Dr. Foley, are you there with us?
How's everyone?
Good morning. So you had suggested that some of the professional development could be done virtually for children online, meaning some of the professional development can actually be done with the teachers in Malawi online to support the learners. We know that here you do a lot of this already. You do a lot of the professional development activities for teachers online. How would the Malawian teachers who are interested in participating in your sessions, where and how would they be able to access your professional developments? If you can give us any advice on how the teachers can access this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Myrie, for inviting me. The first thing I would say is the actual training that I've been doing on a weekly basis on Facebook Live in support for children in trauma. And so I do a 20 to 30 minute training there weekly. So the teachers certainly are welcome to join. How they would access it is first they would need to have a Facebook account, and then I'm going to put a link in the chat, and then they would just go to that link, and then every week they would just access it at that time, or they can access it later because it's recorded, and the recording will be in the private Facebook page. So they would be able to access it at any time after it has been recorded. And so that is just a wonderful way, and many teachers are receiving virtual professional development, even in the United States right now, as we're speaking about having that professional development available for the teachers in Malawi.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Foley, and thank you, Dr. Sabato as well. So we're getting very close to the end of our webinar. At this point, I would like to invite Mr. Hartley Kalua, if you can unmute yourself. Mr. Kalua is the chair of EPOTEN, and he has our farewell message. He's also a head teacher in Malawi. Mr. Kalua, please welcome Mr. Kalua, everyone.
All right, thank you very much, each and everyone who has attended this webinar. I would like to thank, in the first place, those that had put together the idea of having the webinar, the panelists and the organizers. If it weren't for them, I wouldn't think that we would have this webinar. Thank you very much, those that organized this. But I'd like to extend the thank you to the presenters. I mean, we have had quite an enriching presentation from different people, from Justin, Prive, Dr. Cassandra, Joanne, Dr. Jesse, Dr. Chad, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much for your presentations. They have been enriching. We have learned quite a lot. These are eye-openers. And we believe that with the ideas that you have expounded, if we take them on board, then for sure there's going to be a paradigm shift in how we do our things. We are going to rethink our ways of doing. We are going to rethink our education system. I also like to thank EPOTED and our partners in the US for bringing together and coming up with these webinars, because they have provided a forum through which we are learning quite a lot. With EPOTED and with our partners, we believe that if we are continuing with such kind of virtual professional development for us, then for sure things are going to improve. We are going to transform. And lastly, I would like to thank each and everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for attending. You have shown that you have got the commitment to the cause. Please go out there and make a difference. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you. And hope to see you again soon. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.